However, we must continue on. He awoke to darkness and the smell of iron. At first he thought he was still dreaming, caught in the grip of sleep paralysis, because his limbs wouldn't move no matter how he flexed them. His body was all twisted up like a slumbering dog's, and as every attempt to entangle himself resulted in an elbow or knee meeting hard resistance. And even for the dead city, it was dark here. He couldn't see his fingers in front of his face. He groaned, thinking his helmet had somehow gotten twisted round during his sleep, and managed to reach up to his head to fix it. His fingers brushed only bare skin. Helmet gone. His armor gone. A chill sinking through thin fabric. All of it too vivid for a dream. And under that iron smell, another scent. Distant and dusty and hauntingly familiar. His breath began to hitch in his throat as he struggled to get his feet under him and stand up. His palms pressed against hard metal on all sides. So little space in here that he felt like he was being crushed. His chest tightened with the anticipation of it, as if the air itself was coiling tight around his ribs, constricting them to a fracture. He smashed against the walls of the box and heard only a jangle of chains. A fascinating paradox occurs to me. He cried out wordlessly at that voice. It sounded like he was coming from somewhere far below, and yet right beside him, whispering into his ear. High and lilting. It sounded pleased to see him. To form a relationship with another is to limit your own self. We bend and twist our personalities to best suit the sentiments of those we hold dear, their wills and hopes, their desires and fears. Each a separate cage, each requiring a different limitation upon yourself. Perhaps that is why such relationships are referred to as bonds. He turned around in the dark and saw a hole. A mere slit in one wall, barely enough to put his fingers through. He peered through it and squinted against the searing light, and when his eyes adjusted, he saw walls of sheer blue stone, cells filled with squirming, staring shadow. However, the voice continued, these very same relationships are what permit humans to grow, are they not? Through that mutual bond, that shared captivity, you take upon each other's aspects and broaden your world. It chuckled. One might even say that the true self, unaltered and unchained, is the real prisoner. Those endless cells, those judging eyes, he'd never wanted to come here again. To illustrate, let us observe yourself. In one sense, you are completely unhindered, without bonds, free as someone could possibly be. And yet, my, it would seem that your world has grown quite small indeed. His throat opened up, but he still couldn't bring himself to speak. He scrabbled desperately at the hole, and he felt his blood pumping hot behind his eyes, and through that narrow ray of light, he saw the prisoner's fatigues draping from his wrists. It appears that you are still too agitated for a proper introduction, said the voice. No matter. You shall return here again. For an invitation once given is never rescinded. Goro Akechi screamed himself awake. Okay. He roused, kicking his legs out and clutching his chest like someone caught midway through a heart attack. Fingers still clawed in front of him, trying to scratch through a door that was no longer there. When he realized where he was, he sat cross-legged on the hard floor and clutched at the sides of his helmet, taking deep breaths, waiting for his heartbeat to calm. The other person that was exploring the Dead Sea? If you couldn't tell from... In previous chapters, there was some hints given to him with, like, his dialogue and the helmet. That's right, Goro Akechi is in the Dead Sea. Akechi had persevered. He was a survivor. Even now, he'd learned to deal with most things. The constant gnawing hunger pangs. He didn't seem to starve at first anymore, but his gut and his throat often disagreed. The aches in his joints, sleeping always on hard floors or in corners, the dampness in the air seeping into his bones. Or his irritatingly mismatched vision. The visor on his helmet was still broken. But since the stranger had arrived, the anticipation of those scraping, clinking chains was starting to unravel him. Not even Shido had required him to maintain this level of constant paranoia. If he lost his mind down here, he'd inevitably join those rotted cognitive bodies littering the landscape. Or worse. But if even sleep could no longer provide an escape from his anxiety, that was a bad sign. He sucked in air one more time, then exhaled and stood up. Café LeBlanc's attic wasn't any more inviting than the rest of this place. The furniture remained, but everything decorative had already been digested. The TV, the boxes, Akira's bewildering array of displayed junk. Downstairs, Sojiro Sakura's dizzying collection of coffee beans had vanished without a trace. He almost appreciated that. It made him feel like less of a trespasser. So, Café LeBlanc, or at least a version of Café LeBlanc, is in the Dead Sea, and the real one is still fine? The Dead Sea is basically all of Tokyo with Mementos and the palaces smushed together. Like, have you seen videos of Persona 5 Strikers? The Persona 5 Scramble the Phantom Strikers English sub game that's finally coming out. Like, in that game, if you've played it, or at least watched videos of it, then you know that the versions of palaces in that game, like the jails, the first one in Shibuya, the first jail that you go to is superimposed over Shibuya, with the 709 tower in the distance, just like in reality. Apologies for that light spoiler, but, well, this version of LeBlanc here reminded me of it. His gun and his sword were resting on the couch. He holstered them and walked downstairs, and stepped outside. Yongen Jaya hadn't originally been part of this place. When he'd first arrived, it had just been the ruins of the palaces and most of Shibuya. That last part was probably due to Kanashiro's palace, flying high over the district until the phantom thieves had brought it crashing down. He likewise chalked up the endless water to the ruins of Shido's palace, that country-devouring sea draining out here as if through a spigot. But then the rest of Tokyo had appeared overnight. He stepped outside after one of his restless attempts to sleep, and found that the skyline had suddenly become a lot more complex. And a while after that, that black sun had appeared, pinned unceasingly in place. He'd stumbled across the stranger around the same time. He thought that was why he got that feeling of queasy vertigo whenever he looked at the sun too long. Like he was always falling forward. If the rest of Tokyo is here, then... Okay, who's trying to fuse Mementos and Tokyo again, even though Mementos is supposed to be gone? Yaldabaoth, just come out and admit it. You're the one who's causing all this. Whoa, what's that? You still got a bullet through your head. Okay, then it must not be you then. Sorry, you feel free to return to dust now. Yongen Jaya was ravaged, but at least it was familiar. He'd hunted down his own apartment once out of curiosity, and found it as bare as anywhere else. Though in that particular case it wouldn't have been much of a change. Akechi had never invited anyone over, but if he had, The guests might have spent their entire stay with a feeling of vague crawling unease. It was clean. The furniture was of good quality. There might have been a few case files or a laptop or a coffee mug on a table, but beyond that, they would have seen no signs of actual habitation at all. No paintings, books, knickknacks, mementos, or photographs. Akechi had lived in what was essentially a display room. He hadn't thought much of it, personally. He just hadn't seen the point in anything else. But the rest of the world being like this was maddening. The pawn shop, now little more than a splintered shed. The bathhouse, drained and cracked, the faucets all run dry, the tubs only holding more of that cold, dark water. The clinic, poster scrubbed clean, lobby turned bare, the examination room reduced to a table bearing a few patches of mold. The Sakura house, off limits. Akechi stood in the middle of the street, staring at nothing, waiting for the sensation of that cramped and horrible box to leave his head completely. It didn't. Instead, he was struck with a sudden bright pain, that silver spike through his temple, and he cried out and clutched his head. These migraines were one more burden he'd had to bear since arriving here. They came and went without warning, and they were always accompanied by hallucinations of a distant light, a small glint always bobbing up and down like a will-o'-the-wisp. It often stuck around for a while even after the pain faded. And there it was now, pulsing beside the movie theater. Akechi squinted at it, and when the headache abated, he approached. The light receded and vanished. This theater was ancient, marked for demolition until the Phantom Thieves had saved it. He hadn't been around for that one. It had taken place before he'd slipped into their team. But if he had been there, he would have liked to ask some leading questions about why the so-called defenders of justice were suddenly concerned about real estate. Either way, Japan didn't seem any like it anymore. The theaters were small, their slopes shallow, the projectors still using actual film. There was even a cellar level for specialized rooms showing vintage films. All of it sodden and scraped bare now, but deep darkness festered in such places. He thought he might find a few shadows there at least. He pulled at the front door and it opened soundlessly. The posters in the lobby were reduced to gutted glass. The concession stand was unmanned. The carpet squished underfoot as he made his way to the theaters, pushing open the heavy metal doors. They opened and closed with a loud clack that would have probably driven any actual theatergoers mad. No pity for late arrivals. Nothing. Just the ranks of their seats, their red fabric gone stained and threadbare, and the blank white projector screen staring blindly. Akechi left, prepared to start searching for the basement entrance, and then stopped. In the lobby, squishing footsteps. Someone else here. Akechi's pulse jumped, but he didn't hear chains. That was someone else. No telling who. Possibly the shadows themselves had decided to start roaming. It wouldn't be the most unusual thing he'd seen. He crept back to the lobby, slipping his pistol out of his holster. The footsteps wandered back and forth. Their owner was apparently a curious one. They were examining the decor. Akechi pressed himself against the corner and flicked the safety off his gun. At that soft click, the footsteps stopped. Too observant. This was no shadow. The footsteps resumed again, coming closer now. A rustle of cloth. A weapon had been drawn. Akechi's heartbeat was calm. This, at least, was his element. He counted down the seconds. He placed his finger on the trigger. Then he spun around the corner, gun raised high, and found himself staring into the barrel of Akira's pistol. Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! The two of them locked eyes. Somewhere water dripped. Akechi's one visible eye was pinned wide. After a long moment, Akira lowered his gun. "Hey, Akechi," he said. "Hello, Joker," Akechi replied. And then he shot him. Oh my! This ended quite well, didn't it? I'm actually surprised that this actually went 2 parts. 2 whole parts. I'm gonna have to release these 2 parts. Okay, if I manage to record 3 parts of a chapter and 2 parts of a chapter, here's what I'm gonna do. As normal, it'll be normal release schedule for 3 parts over Saturday, Sunday, and then the 3rd episode on a Sunday. But if it's 2 parts, it'll be 2 parts on a weekend, a Saturday, a Sunday, and if there was a 3rd episode released on that particular Saturday, well, the part 1 will be Sunday, the last part will be Sunday, first part will be Sunday, second part will be Sunday, and then first part of another 3 or 2-parter will be Sunday, and we'll just go from there. So I hope you enjoyed. I'm the Masked Ranger. Keep moving forward, blah, 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 blah. This was quite the wham episode. Toodles. Until next time. Bye.